Brian Smith here, and welcome to the Dream Path Podcast, where I try to get inside the heads of talented creatives from all over the world. My goal is to demystify and humanize the creative process and make it accessible to everyone. Now let's jump in. Jason Moore, welcome back to the Duocast.
As usual, Brian, thank you for inviting me back. I appreciate it.
Yeah, let's talk about Mark Pickerel. What'd you think of that interview?
Oh man, that was a great interview. And despite the background noise issues that we had, I think the audio turned out stellar. It was really great sound.
I was really worried about it. You did a nice job with it.
Yeah, I was worried about it too going into it, but not really an issue much. Just a few spots where there's a creaky chair or, a car driving by or something like that. But it kind of adds to the kind of the feel of where you guys were, the ambience,
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and it kind of gave you you felt like you were sitting in an antique shop. And that's great because that's what you guys were doing.
Right. Yeah, it was kind of cool to see the photos that came out of that session. And Rob Frazier took some amazing black and white photos that we posted on the website and put on social media.
Oh, yeah.
But just the gritty back room of an antique store feel of those photos really added a lot to the context. And I think if listeners haven't listened to that episode yet, go to the website. Check out the photos that were taken of that interview. You just get a sense of the vibe in that room that day. And I think it would be nice to have going into listening to that chat.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that you were able to sit down with him and talk about his journey. I only knew him from being the drummer of the Screaming Trees, which is one of my favorite bands of all time and one of the original grunge bands in the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
I just remember a friend of mine who had the tape or had a tape of Uncle Anesthesia back in the day. And I really liked it because it was something different than the crap that was still considered mainstream rock at that time, other than maybe Alice in Chains, who had Facelift out, the previous summer. But, in radio, I worked in radio and we were still being force-fed bands like Warrant and Poison and Guns N' Roses, which were pretty much dominating the airwaves and also dominating MTV at that time. So it was refreshing to hear bands like the Screaming Trees and, Soundgarden, Mudhoney, Nirvana, and of course Pearl Jam a little bit later on, that just became a major shift in musical consciousness at that time. So to sit down with a pioneer of that sound and that time, it was just felt like something special.
I love the way you phrased that, a shift in musical consciousness. That's exactly the way I feel about it because Uncle Anesthesia was my portal into the Screaming Trees. So I came in kind of late. They started in the mid 80s and then I think Uncle Anesthesia was like 1991.
Yeah.
That was the first Screaming Trees album that I listened to. And then I started to go a little deeper into the catalog and I found out, they're from Ellensburg? What? I haven't heard of any bands from Ellensburg. And as you know, being 30 miles away from Yakima, it's like, that's an even smaller town than Yakima.
Yeah.
And it really raises a lot of questions like, how did this happen? Like, how did this great music come from this area that's like basically a podunk town?
Right.
But, Mark's story is pretty compelling because a lot of folks, when they think about bands that shift the musical consciousness of America, of the world, in terms of the grunge movement, they probably don't think about small town bands. They think about Los Angeles, they think about Seattle, New York, that type of thing.
Right.
Maybe San Francisco, but Ellensburg, Washington, talk about coming out of nowhere.
Right.
But it was really cool to talk to Mark because he's one of these guys who's so humble, and yet you find out through research and through talking to him that he has been part of some amazing projects, including recording with Kurt Cobain and Mark Lanegan on a Nirvana track, or 2 tracks actually.
That's right.
In the late 80s.
Yep.
And so he has got this posse of people, this crew, this inner circle of folks that he's connected with ever since the mid 80s. And that has taken him through this journey of starting all kinds of bands, new sounds, new connections, new relationships. And then he starts Mark Pickerel and his Praying Hands. And because of those connections that he made previously, he's collaborating with Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses, gets called by Brandi Carlile to record on her first album and then a later album. And you realize that there are folks like Mark out there that their story is not told yet.
Right.
There's no book on them.
Mm-hmm.
You can read their Wikipedia page, but it really doesn't tell the full story. So it was a privilege to sit down and be the facilitator for bringing that story out. And it just felt so special. And that was confirmed actually when somebody posted on Twitter that this interview was essential listening. And I'm going to read that tweet here.
Okay.
There's a guy named Dan from the band Sun Dodger.
Okay.
It's a Seattle band apparently, but he started in Ellensburg or in Yakima, somewhere in eastern Washington. And he tweeted, I recommend this as essential listening for Northwest musicians. I used to frequent Mark's Ellensburg record store in the early 90s as a teenager, musician trying to become a rock star. Like him, I moved from behind the drums to the front, and his story is inspiring. # Seattle musicians.
Nice.
Yeah, it was really cool. And I took a screenshot of one of his comments to Mark's tweet about the show, and I put it on Instagram. And I really appreciate when folks chime in and give feedback on an episode like that, because it confirms for me what I suspected from the beginning. As I walked out of that antique shop after that interview, I knew I had something special on record.
Oh, for sure.
And that you were going to make it sound great. But I really never know for sure until I get that first response from someone. And all it takes is one.
Right.
It just takes one listener to connect with, and you realize, you know what? It's not just me. This really is something special. And it's kind of like, golf. And this is kind of a strange analogy, but I'm not a big golfer. I golf maybe, if I'm lucky, once a year, but usually it's like once every 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
And when I go out, I'm terrible. I lose almost all of my golf balls, and I'm borrowing golf balls from the folks that I'm golfing with. But I would say once every time I golf, so out of 18 holes, I hit one shot, maybe two, that are perfect. Like it's a drive off the tee, and it looks like a PGA Pro drive.
Nice.
And so for me, all it takes to keep going back and to keep wanting to golf is to hit that one shot. So whenever one listener responds, it's kind of like that one perfect drive. It's like one listener responds and says, this is great. You need to check this out. That for me is my perfect PGA Pro drive, and it keeps me going. So Dan at Sun Dodger Band, thanks for chiming in. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, we really appreciate that. And it's true, And Mark, to me, has this really cool vibe. When I hear like the Praying Hands Band or Pickerel and the Peyote 3, this is what it reminds me of. It reminds me of driving down the road in like a 57 Chevy convertible with the top down, guitar sitting in the passenger seat, listening to Johnny Cash, and just driving on this long stretched out highway in the middle of nowhere. And that's just where my mind goes when I see Mark and hear his music, and it's just where it takes me.
Yeah.
And, I love the fact that he runs an antique shop too. I'm really into going to random shops like that and just looking at the old records and retro looking lamps and rugs and just anything that kind of takes you back a few decades, back to the 70s or the 60s. And it's just very cool, his whole vibe.
It is really cool. And his hair is really cool.
Oh, he's got cool hair. He's got hair. That's amazing. I mean,
yeah. A lot of it.
I'd love to have half of his hair,
Yeah, his antique shop where we recorded the interview is appointment only. But if you want to go check it out, send him an email and see if you can go, check out some of his stuff. There's all kinds of costumes and leather jackets and jean jackets and hats and boots and things that are one of a kind.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm definitely going to call him and make an appointment or send him an email.
Right on. So, Jason, we also have another episode to talk about, a bonus episode with Jeffrey King.
Mm-hmm.
What'd you think of that one?
That was a great episode. It's another episode in which we get to hear a different perspective from another great screenwriter, or what they call, and he's also what they call a showrunner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the first showrunner I've interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
So for folks who listened to that interview, it is with Jeffrey Paul King, who is the creator and showrunner of The Republic of Sarah. And what I really appreciated about that chat with Jeffrey is that he's very off the radar, off the grid type of guy.
Mm-hmm.
So there's almost nothing on social media about him. There's just a couple of interviews here and there about his work on the Republic of Sarah. But before that, he worked on Elementary for years. He was a writer and producer on the show Elementary, with which is a Sherlock Holmes CBS series, and it's got Lucy Liu in it, and it's a great, very, very smart show. You can tell that the folks that are writing on that show are wicked smart.
Yeah.
Or as Matt Damon would say in Good Will Hunting, wicked smart.
Yep.
But what I like about Jeffrey is that, he's so off the radar. And the reason he is that he works his ass off on doing real stuff. He's running a show.
Right.
He's writing, he's producing, and he must be one of the hardest working people in Hollywood based upon our chat. We talked about that in the interview, actually, work ethic and what it means to be a writer right now in television and in film, and what is required of writers in television and film, what is required of showrunners. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like it's just brutal.
Oh, yeah.
But he's doing it. He's doing the thing. And because he is working so hard on that, he's not anywhere on social media. I don't know. I just really respect that type of work ethic. And it shows, too, when you look at the work product and what's being put out there. Mm-hmm. This is a guy that cares a lot about what goes onto the screen. And there's just so much that happens before the shoot and before you see that episode up on television. You get a sense of that when you listen to this interview with Jeffrey King. I've always wanted to have a showrunner on the show because I hear about them all the time. The showrunners that have like a 7 to 9 season run, and their schedule is so brutal, and they're, working 12 to 15 hour days, and they're working 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And this is one of those guys, maybe not 7 days a week. That's probably an exaggeration, but a lot of hours. And they're true creators.
Yeah.
They create something out of whole cloth. Like, here's my idea. And with Jeffrey King, his idea for the Republic of Sarah came about very organically based upon his understanding of geology and geography and maps. And I know that sounds weird, but his undergraduate degree is in cartography and geography or something like that.
Yeah.
And so you kind of see how this organically came about. This show, it's very much a part of him and his understanding of history and politics and relationships. And so it's really cool to kind of hear about that process.
Yeah, it definitely would be fun to pick his brain. Yeah, one of the things that surprised me about the interview, and it stated in the interview, was that he used to be a professional opera singer. And so I had to kind of look that up. He was a singer until the age of 13. He performed as a boy soprano with the Boston Lyric Opera Company. I just found that to be interesting. This guy's got a whole gamut of experience in all kinds of different things.
Yeah, I didn't know about him before the interview. And apparently he was a child opera star.
Yeah.
But one common thread I see with creatives like Jeffrey Paul King and a lot of the filmmakers that I interview and actors is that their childhoods are typically filled with creative endeavors, and their parents are very supportive of them getting into the arts in some way.
Yeah.
So it's nice to actually see that there's a connection there.
Right. That
these kids that are creatives as adults were, given creative opportunities when they were kids by their parents. Mm-hmm. So, it works. It works, guys. So make sure you give those opportunities to your kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jason, you and I have been watching the same series, mm-hmm. the Rick Rubin, Paul McCartney 3-2-1 series on Hulu.
Oh, yeah. Have
you finished it yet?
I just got through watching the 6th one yesterday.
So what'd you think of don't spoil anything for me, but what'd you think of the entire series? I'm only 2 episodes in.
The entire series was great, and it kind of ended on kind of a note that it's not quite done. Like, it almost feels like there's more to come.
Oh, that's cool.
Because, Paul McCartney has such a vast career, you can't just stop. There's so much to cover. And I just love Paul McCartney. I feel like he's a family member. I mean, he's been in my consciousness since I was born, basically. My parents listened to the Beatles since I was a baby, and it's just always been there in my musical psyche. And something that I've always geeked out on is listening to songs in their multi-track form, dropping the faders on certain tracks, getting to hear the isolated tracks, the vocals, all separate. It kind of makes up the whole fabric of a song. So mm-hmm. the fact that you have a famous producer like Rick Rubin standing there with Paul McCartney and breaking apart these songs track by track and listening to various mistakes and just hearing the rawness of those Beatles songs and those Paul McCartney songs that were recorded so many years ago. It's just such a treat. You know, we have Paul, who's 79 now. He'll be 80 this year. And
he looks great.
Oh, he does for 79 for sure. And he can still kind of hit those high notes a little bit. I mean, he's not quite as not quite as strong as, obviously, you know, when you're in your 20s and 30s, you can really belt it out. But it makes you think that, you know, he's probably not going to be around very long in the scheme of things. And so it had to have been an honor for Rick to be able to sit down with Paul and ask him questions and listen to his stories, and just something very cool. Definitely something that will go down in history.
I agree. And I went in a little differently. My lens is a little different than yours in terms of the Beatles, because I was not a huge Beatles fan growing up.
What?
I wasn't. You know, my parents did not.
Oh.
My parents did not have a single Beatles album.
Oh, wow.
They had a lot of vinyl, but no Beatles. And so my exposure to the Beatles came about later in life. And when I heard it, I was, you know, of course, how can you not love certain Beatles songs? You know, Let It Be.
Right.
Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And they're obviously, you know, iconic in music history, and their songs are amazing. But for some reason, those songs are not in my heart as songs that, you know, sort of define my childhood or define my teens, or I don't look at them with reverence like you do. But at the same time, it just floored me to see how talented Paul McCartney was at age 79. Sitting down with Rick Rubin and just knocking out, you know, he would explain chord structure to Rick Rubin. It's like, this is how we look at, you know, how we looked at chords, and, you know, play a C chord and let's go up and just move a half step. And so he's got this talent for understanding the foundation of a song.
Right.
And how a song comes together, and how it, you know, the parts of it and the mathematical equation of a song. And then, of course, Rick Rubin, he's almost like a mythological figure in music, who is this magic man who comes in and takes artists and takes their music and makes it something, you know, elevates it to a level that they couldn't have done without him, that type of thing.
That's true, yeah.
And so Rick breaks down, as you were saying, Jason, breaks down these tracks and talks them through with Sir Paul. And what happens on screen is just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
To hear those songs broken down. And for instance, Penny Lane, I think that was in the second episode that I just saw last night, the piccolo trumpet part and the story behind the piccolo trumpet in that song.
Yeah.
And how the piccolo trumpet, I think it was George Harrison who had George Martin.
Yes.
Who the producer, who had identified, he knew all these musicians, these orchestra musicians, and found this piccolo trumpet player. And I don't think Paul knew what a piccolo trumpet was before that recording session. And then Paul is saying, you know, we need a higher note. We need you to hit these higher notes. And the piccolo trumpet player is like, I can't do that. That's too high.
Right.
And Paul's like, you can do it. Just do it. You know, and he nailed it. He got it out.
He sure did.
But it's those little stories of the song, and not just the song, but a tiny little part in the song that really pull me in, because you realize that every song that you listen to has a story, and every note that you hear in a song has its own separate little story. And there's so much history. There's so much that went into these recording sessions with George Harrison and John Lennon, and that relationship, that complicated, layered, nuanced relationship between all of the band members, and how George Harrison was not a songwriter initially.
No.
And didn't really consider himself a songwriter, but turns out that he was a great songwriter. He was just kind of in the making.
Exactly.
And to see the history unfold in a very short episode, just a 30-minute episode. Yeah, I haven't been hugely impressed with Rick Rubin as a television personality.
Yeah.
You know, he's not really a dynamic, charismatic guy to be on television. I think his place is behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Maybe behind a mixing board. So Rick Rubin is a great listener, and it's perfect for a series like that, because you really don't watch a documentary about Paul McCartney and the songwriting process and breaking down these songs looking for a television personality that's going to, you know, wow you. And kind of inject his own personality into the narrative. And so it's nice. It's nice that it's black and white, and Rick Rubin is just kind of in the background, and you can kind of see him nodding. And most of it is just Sir Paul talking.
Yeah.
And chewing gum.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
And he does it all the way through. So
yeah, just this giant wad of gum. It's like he might have 3 pieces in his mouth. Chewing his gum constantly. But other than the gum chewing, I found the last 2 episodes that I watched to be fantastic, and I'm looking forward to finishing it up this weekend.
Yeah, I hope you get a chance to do that, because it continues to be fascinating. You learn something new. I learned something new from it, and I've seen the entire Beatles anthology. I've read books. So yeah, it's pretty fascinating and pretty cool. And they don't just talk about the Beatles. They go into Paul McCartney and Wings. They go into Paul's solo stuff. They talk about John Lennon's stuff. At one point, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but there was a part where they listened to John Lennon just singing on his own and double-tracked vocal of a song called This Boy. And I actually got emotional because, I'm thinking in my brain, they recorded that in 1964. So John Lennon basically had like 14 years left of his life and didn't even know it.
Yeah.
So it's heartbreaking, to think about that. But we have that wonderful music to listen to if you want to. And just a talented group of 4 guys.
Yeah. One more comment I'll make about Paul McCartney and his genius. He made a comment in one of the 2 episodes that I watched that he doesn't read music and he doesn't write music.
Right.
And I was scratching my head after I heard that. I'm like, wait a minute. He doesn't write music. He doesn't read music. And then he continues talking and he says, yeah, it's just all in my head. And you look at the chords that he plays, like Blackbird. I mean, just they actually have footage of him playing Blackbird on the guitar. And you're like, this guy's a fucking badass.
Yeah.
So how does he not write music and read music? But I think for him, it just comes from a very, I don't know if it's left brain or right brain, but it's not the logical part of your brain. It's the artistic part of his brain. And it just kind of flows out. And yeah, he knows how to play chords. And I think he for sure knows about chord progressions and bridges, and it comes naturally to him. But he can't just sit down and tell you, the way a music professor would tell you
right
how a song is structured. I love that. I love that about Paul McCartney, because I don't have really that fundamental knowledge either. Yet it gives me hope that, if I keep at it and I dive deep enough, maybe I can have that same flow that he has to write songs.
Yeah.
And, just so special to be able to see him sitting at the piano and just knocking out whatever it is, Let It Be or Eleanor Rigby or Michelle, and playing these tunes and kind of showing you how they came together and what his thought process was. I know we're just kind of, going on and on about this series, but it's pretty special.
I agree. I thought it was great. Everybody should check it out if you like Paul, if you like the Beatles.
Nice. So, last item on the agenda.
Yeah.
What do we have coming up next?
Well, we're finally going to unleash the Chong, Tommy Chong.
Yes, Tommy Chong. We've been waiting for a while on this one.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been editing this thing, and, you are right. He kind of bounces all over the place. But it's very cool. It's very cool to just have Chong, just even if it was just his audio, but we've got video of him apparently in his bedroom, just kind of chatting with you, random stuff. So it's really cool. Really cool.
Yeah. I think Tommy bouncing around so much is a product of the rapport that we established at the beginning.
Sure.
And I think he just felt comfortable talking about whatever was on the top of his mind.
Sure.
And our conversation went into some places that I did not expect it to go. And so it was fun, but the result is it's a longer interview than most. I think the YouTube version is probably an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And we might chop the audio only version down by 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But it's really cool to talk to somebody like Tommy, who has been part of comedy history for decades now, and he is still at it.
Yep.
He's still creating, he's still writing scripts, he's still collaborating with Cheech Marin. He's also got this business, marijuana products, which we talk a little bit about, but not much. Mainly we talk about his career and creativity.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Tommy And I don't want this to sound, negative or anything like that. I think Tommy does frequently use marijuana. He admits it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that helps with the kind of conversation you guys had where it kind of bounced here and there.
Mm-hmm.
At least in my opinion, because, anytime I've ever smoked, I kind of get a little bit talkative and you kind of forget where you're going. So,
right. Lowers your inhibitions a little bit, lowers your anxiety levels to the point where you kind of open up more than you would have otherwise.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It helps you concentrate sometimes,
mm-hmm.
but also it can lead to conversation that kind of flies around in different areas and kind of takes different roads here and there. And then you kind of come back to the original point and go, what were we talking about originally? I always love that about marijuana. It's just, you could just have this.
Well, I do that without marijuana. So I got to go into these pretty sober.
Yeah. I don't do it as much as I used to, but when I loved those times back in the day when I would have conversations with friends and we'd all be smoking and you'd start a conversation about one thing and then it goes 5 different directions. And then 30 minutes later, everybody's like, what did we start talking about? How did we get here? And it's just, that's the fun part, aside from the actual high of it.
Well, my friend, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for chatting with me today.
Oh, yeah.
And we shall talk again after the Tommy Chong episode launches.
I'm looking forward to it, Brian. Thank you.
Right on, brother. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Hey, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, I have a favor to ask. Can you go to wherever you listen to podcasts and leave me a review? Your feedback is what keeps this podcast going. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook with the handle @DreamPathPod. And as always, go find your dream path.